As the 2023 college football season gets closer, we are going to take a look at the toughest schedules in college football for the season. The first, Ole Miss. Ole Miss in the SEC has a very difficult schedule and did not get the best. Their first game of the season is against Mercer, a game that Ole Miss paid for to get a win and expect a blowout here for them, beating up on a team that they have no problem in handling. The second week, they travel at Tulane. This will not be an easy game for them. Tulane last season beat a top-flight program in the bowl game in the Cotton Bowl against USC. They do lose star running back Tajay Spears, but still have senior QB Pratt and a lot of experience on that team. Two good offenses will be on display, but the question for Ole Miss will be who is under center, whether it's Jackson Dart or Oklahoma State transfer QB Spencer Sanders. Going to be an interesting one to monitor and one of the most intense QB battles this offseason. Week 3, their third game, is at home against Georgia Tech. Ole Miss did not allow a point versus Georgia Tech last year, and their best offensive player, Jeff Sims, transferred to Nebraska and is no longer with the program. Should be another good win for Ole Miss, but that is the end of the easiness stretch of the schedule, to be honest. They then travel to Alabama, and this starts a rough 2-game stretch for them as they play Bama on the road and likely face newly transferred quarterback from Notre Dame, Tyler Buchner. Bama was on the outside looking in of the college football playoff last season, but Saban and company will play well with a college football playoff berth on their mind, and being a road game for Ole Miss, a team they lost to last year at home, this one will be a tough one and likely a loss for them. They then play host to the LSU Tigers. Brian Kelly enters year 2, a full season of recruiting, and led by veteran QB Jaden Daniels. LSU handled this team last year, 45-20 in a loss for Ole Miss. I do not see Ole Miss improving, especially on a tougher margin, losing a lot more players than LSU did and getting a full year for Brian Kelly. They then play host to Arkansas, and man, the SEC does not relent one bit. Could not imagine having that tough of a schedule every week. But senior QB KJ Jefferson returns for Arkansas, and they did beat Ole Miss last season 42-24. Jackson Dart played okay for Arkansas, but KJ Jefferson's 3 touchdowns, along with running back Sanders, did the job, and I would expect them to have a great game again, as the whole reason that KJ Jefferson came back was to lead this team to a good season, and I think he'll do exactly that. They then traveled to Auburn. Auburn hired Hugh Freeze this offseason, and he is the former Ole Miss head coach. Expect some revenge from him and his team at home. And the way that everything ended, the scandal, not the greatest. Had to spend some time at Liberty, but he is now back in the SEC and is hot on the recruiting trail. In that game against Auburn last season, Ole Miss did beat them, and they had 3 players with 100 rushing yards, including Jackson Dart with 115. Expect him to play well, and an offense with Judkins to be the main focus of it. Then they play host to Vanderbilt at home, a gimme game versus the bottom of the SEC. Jackson Dart had over 400 yards passing versus Vandy in a 52-28 win. They then play host to Texas A&M. Ole Miss beat them in a close one last year, 31-28. And Texas A&M this season has the number 1 recruiting class in the country. But Jimbo just can't seem to put it together at A&M. So I'm not sure how to really gauge this one. Sophomore quarterback does return for Texas A&M along with a litany of top recruits. Jimbo Fisher is 1-2 versus Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. And this is a home game for Ole Miss, but going to be another close game. They then travel to the reigning defending national champions and the Georgia Bulldogs, who they haven't played in a while. Lane Kiffin has yet to face Kirby Smart in his time at Ole Miss, and they'll be in for a tough one. Georgia, I think, has taken Alabama's mantle as the top program, and Ole Miss will most definitely feel that. They then play host to UL Monroe, a Sun Belt matchup versus a team that went 4-8 last year. But shout out Duck Dynasty. And that leads us to the rivalry game, the last game of the season at Mississippi State. A rivalry matchup on the road for Thanksgiving as tradition. Mississippi State tragically lost their head coach Mike Leach, and longtime assistant Zach Arnett now takes over. He will likely have a slow start, but everybody gets up for a rivalry game, and especially on Thanksgiving. So definitely take a look at the under 7.5 wins is what most sportsbooks have them at. So take a look at that one. We now go to the second toughest schedule, South Carolina Gamecocks. They start the season in our neutral site game against North Carolina Tar Heels and Drake May. Going to be a very high-scoring game for UNC. That's how they like to play. A couple of transfers, wide receivers come in as we've gone over that. So going to be a good game for UNC that I think they take. They then play host to Furman. Furman is in the FCS, but was 10-3 last season. Not completely unheard of to see an FCS team upset FBS teams. Furman may give them a little bit of trouble, but South Carolina should cruise through that one. They then travel to the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia beat South Carolina last season 48-7 in a game that they did not score until the final 53 seconds left in the fourth quarter. Rattler had a rough outing, 118 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I expect the same, especially being in Georgia. Week 4, they play host to Mississippi State, a home game against an SEC school that they don't often play. Not sure how their season will be. I think it will be a slow starter, but this will likely be one of the first games for Mississippi State against an SEC opponent, especially being on the road, and South Carolina will likely be favored here. They then travel to the Tennessee Volunteers. Joe Milton takes over at quarterback for Hendon Hooker and the Volunteers. He got hurt in the game against South Carolina last season. It was a blowout at that point. South Carolina played great. So Milton got a lot of playing time, 4 of 8 with 108 yards passing. And I like Josh Heupel a lot. He is a great coach, especially in the SEC. And I think that will be a factor with it being in Tennessee and a win for Tennessee that South Carolina loses this one. South Carolina then plays host to Florida. The Gamecocks struggled versus Florida last season, losing 38-6. And South Carolina could not generate much on offense. And Florida will look a little bit different with Anthony Richardson departing the program for the NFL. But former Wisconsin quarterback Graham Mertz takes over under center, and I think will give South Carolina trouble yet again. They then play at Missouri. South Carolina lost to Missouri last season, and this one is at Missouri. So if they lost at home last season, it will be a more considered effort for South Carolina to get the win here, but definitely not the best sign when you lost to them at home. And the Mizzou defense shut down South Carolina, did not allow them to get more than 1 touchdown, which is exactly how South Carolina loses games when they don't score. They then traveled to Texas A&M. South Carolina beat Texas A&M last year 30-24, but this one flips to a road game, and the margins will get thinner here. We talked about it with Ole Miss. This may be the season Jimbo puts it together, having a great recruiting class come in, along with some experience at quarterback. I think this one likely flips for them. They then play host to Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State joins FBS this season and the Conference USA, led by Rich Rodriguez, former Michigan coach and longtime D1 coach. He leads this program. Don't expect it to be too tough for South Carolina, but they are playing a Division I school. Then play host to Vandy. Should be a good win for South Carolina and an easy win at home. Third home game in a row against Kentucky. South Carolina beat a ranked Kentucky team away from home, and they now get them in South Carolina. Kentucky, sneaky good team that surprises in spots, 7-5 last year, so always a tough win. Then the rivalry game at home versus Clemson. The win last season for South Carolina was their second straight top 10 win and a big win for the program. Can they replicate it? Clemson no longer has DJ Uiagalelei, and Cade Klubnik will be QB1 for Clemson. It is a home game, but a tough one nonetheless, and for a program that has aspirations to get back on top. We then go to number 3 and the Big Ten, getting out of the SEC. The Minnesota Gophers schedule at home against Nebraska. Not sure how this one goes. I've talked about how I like Matt Rule as a coach. This one is a complete toss-up. Tanner Morgan left the program. Kaliak Manis now takes over. Not sure how he's going to be on the winning side of the football, but he will definitely pass the ball, different from how the Gophers like to play. They did beat Nebraska 20-13 last season, and Kaliak Manis got playing time in that game, going 6 of 12 with 137 yards. They then get an easy win at home against Eastern Michigan, but he does have a soft spot for the MAC, where he got his start from at Western Michigan, and as recent as 2021 did lose to Bowling Green. They then traveled to North Carolina, and this will be a tough game for the exact reason we talked about with South Carolina. This team can pass, and the Big Ten is not known for their defensive backs. And the Gophers did okay versus the pass last season, but when you're playing a likely top 10 NFL pick, it definitely changes things. I expect the Gophers to drop this one. They then get a road game at Northwestern. Northwestern is likely the worst team in the Big Ten, and Gophers have not lost to them since 2018. A home game against Louisiana. A good program in the Sun Belt that was not the same last season without Billy Napier, but should be a win for the Gophers. They then play host to the Michigan Wolverines. These two have not played since 2020, and the Gophers stayed competitive for about a half against Michigan, but unraveled in the second. Jim Harbaugh will have his team ready to play and take care of the Gophers. The Gophers then travel to the Iowa Hawkeyes. PJ Fleck has always struggled versus Iowa and has yet to beat them in his tenure. Last season, their offense was subpar. Many totals were about 27 points. Super low. That's because they didn't have a quarterback that can move the ball down the field. They bring in Cade McNamara, former Michigan quarterback, looking to solve that. PJ Fleck's always struggled with him. I expect that to likely happen again. A home game against Michigan State is the next one for him. Michigan State is trending downward after a good 2021 season. Mel Tucker signed the extension. Last year was not it for him. The Gophers took care of them 34-7 last season and an easy win. Another home game against the Illinois Fighting Illini. The Gophers lost to Illinois last year when they were ranked and have improved under Brett Bielema, who's got Illinois looking like the former Wisconsin teams that he coached. The Gophers then traveled to Purdue. Purdue loses Aiden O'Connell, but Purdue did beat them last season. Who knows with Purdue if they can replace that QB talent. The last two games of the season are going to be brutal for the Minnesota Gophers. They traveled to the Ohio State University. Second last game of the season. By this point, new QB Kyle McCord, former high school quarterback of Marvin Harrison, will likely be dialed and ready to roll. Unfortunately for them, this is going to be the game that really determines their season, but it may be a look-ahead spot for them, as the following game will be the rivalry game against Michigan or Ohio State. Who knows, they may surprise, but I definitely wouldn't want to be playing Ohio State right before their rivalry game against Wisconsin at home. PJ Fleck was brought in to beat Wisconsin. He is 3-3 versus them and has won 2 straight. Luke Fickell will be in year 1 of the Wisconsin Badger program. May not have his recruits yet, may not have everything he needs. It will be a home game for the Gophers, and they will likely have the edge in this one, as the Gophers have won 2 straight. Those are the 3 toughest schedules in the Big Ten. Definitely take a look at taking those unders this year. Thank you all for listening. Please like, follow, subscribe, leave a comment. Anything else you want me to talk about, I can definitely get into that. And as always, thank you and see you next time.